At that height just now, Rogers wouldn't dare to try. He may be able to do it, but he has never been trained in skydiving, and it definitely wouldn't be as easy as Luke made it seem. Luke, unaware of Captain America's thoughts, opened the map, scrutinized it, and started to get ready quickly. As Superman, I should be able to fly. What's the big deal about low-altitude parachuting? If he knew Rogers' thoughts, Luke would answer this. Through the thick fog, in the middle of the night, they marched all the way there. Before long, they went deep into the dense forest edge and saw a large and heavily guarded base. A high wall was erected by an electrified wire fence, behind which stood a guard post. Beams of spotlights swept by, and below were groups of patrol guards. These Hydra armband guardsmen were a century ahead of the Allies in terms of equipment. The infinite energy from the Tesseract had been applied to various weapons, guns, and cannons by Hydra's leader, Red Skull. There were even giant multi-turret tanks, such meat-grinder-like steel monsters. It can be said responsibly that if Captain America had not been born, the embodiment of heroism, and staged an anti-German rise, the world's timeline would have turned a corner. The Axis powers have entirely overwhelmed the Allied armies in terms of technology. Once Red Skull's enhanced soldiers were developed and sent to the European battlefield, the Allied nations, which are currently advancing, will immediately collapse. You go to rescue the captured soldiers. I'll see if you can find Red Skull. Luke gave orders. Both Red Skull and Dr. Zola should be in this base. If he can get your hands on the Tesseract in advance, it's a good choice. Although in Luke's eyes, the 6 Infinity Stones may not have the same value as the Superman cards. But the Tesseract, with its infinite energy, really intrigued him. The secret base in Clausburg was heavily guarded, with 2 weapons factories on the left and right and a garrison of up to 600 men. With a strong fortress and powerful firepower, it could block out all external enemies. If the Allies wanted to break through from the front, they would have to incur heavy casualties many times. The best way to take over this base was by mobilizing the Air Force to carry out high-intensity carpet bombing. Using the brutal strategy of carpet bombing to destroy the Hydra base hidden in the deep forest. Otherwise, with those monster-like steel giant tanks, significantly pain-resisting, and the enhanced soldiers, no one would know how many lives the Allies would lose. This was the reason why Allied command was reluctant to send troops to carry out the rescue plan. There is no point in rushing into action, except to lose more lives. Luke, how do we sneak into this base without the others knowing? Rogers, hiding behind the trees, asked. This Hydra secret base was too heavily guarded. The guard post looks like a steel sentry standing in the night, with a team of Nazi soldiers patrolling back and forth every 5 minutes and conspicuous spotlights sweeping in all directions. Rogers, who was carrying a shield, had a headache. At this time, he finally realized that it was a ridiculous and arduous task to raid the secret base of Hydra with only 2 people. I have a bold idea. Luke thought for a moment and seriously said, why don't I go out and kill them all? No living person would see us. A perfect infiltration operation. Rogers didn't catch his breath and almost choked. He coughed several times before he recovered. He couldn't tell whether Luke was joking or was being serious. After receiving the serum injection and becoming a super soldier, they may have the capability of fighting against hundreds. But in the face of Hydra's barrage, solo heroism won't work. A well-thought-out plan was a must. Rogers racked his brains, trying to figure out how to save the captured soldiers and avoid Hydra's detection. Luke, I think. Luke dashed out of the trees without waiting for Captain America to come up with a plan. *T. Steve ran after him. Strong air current blew the fallen leaves on the ground. In a few breaths, they disappeared deep into the dense forest. Simultaneously, on the muddy road next to the bush, a military truck transporting goods passed slowly. The headlights, like 2 blades, cut through the thick fog. The gate of the base slowly opened to make way for passage. Dong. In a blurry shadow, drawing a swift straight line, rammed into the slow military truck. The terrifying impact was like a long-standing solid shell slamming into the truck's body. The solid, thick truck, as if struck countless times by a swinging hammer, suddenly collapsed. With a boom, the military truck fell on its side and sank deep into the muddy road, unable to withstand the sudden and terrible impact. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The loud noise woke up the calm secret base. The guards at the gates were the first to react. They ran over with their metal-cased energy guns in their hands. The base behind them also sounded the alarm. The sharp siren echoed under the night sky. Rogers looked at the fallen military truck and the unmistakable outline of the dented surface. Then he looked at Luke, who was unharmed and was speechless for a moment. Are super soldiers that strong? Rogers lowered his head, stretched out his hands and clenched it into a fist. Unfortunately, he didn't feel that there was a terrifying force in his body that could overturn military trucks. They were the same super soldiers. Why is Luke able to do that? Rogers, who had always maintained his confidence and fighting spirit, couldn't help but wonder if Dr. Erskine had overdosed Luke when he injected them with the serum. You go to the prison where the captured soldiers are held and see if you can find Bucky. I'll get Hydra's attention. Luke mentioned the plan as he lifted the overturned military truck. After changing the card to Superdemon, he felt that his inner strength seemed to have improved again. Not only did the efficiency of absorbing stellar energy increased, but his physical quality was also strengthened. Both hands' bulging muscles were twisted together like twisted steel wires, highlighting the clear lines full of strength. The army uniform was strained and sounded like it was about to be torn. As for the military boots under his feet, they have long been cracked by his sprint. Wear the suit. Seeing that the military uniform was about to be stretched out, and he was about to fall into the embarrassing situation of wearing torn clothes, Luke quickly wore the suit he had put away before. With the Kryptonian uniform to protect his body, no matter how dangerous the battle was, it wouldn't be like a certain big green man, with only the torn pants that could barely cover up his shame every time. The enemy is here, be quick. It didn't take long for the guards wearing Hydra armbands to arrive. Only one figure stood on the muddy road. The tall man in steel armor lifted the overturned military truck as if it were a dumbbell. This shocking scene, beyond human comprehension, directly made the guards carrying energy guns lose their wits. As it turns out, even Hydra's brainwashing fanaticism still left the desire for survival like ordinary people. After seeing the invaders' inhuman strength, a few guards shouted, "Hail Hydra!" ran away without looking back. It's the Superman of the Allies. Notify the leader, Superman is here. Anxious shouts were sent back to the base. Someone had recognized Luke's young as Superman, who frequently appeared in the newspapers these days. Super targeting ready. Luke's eyes narrowed slightly, and he positioned the giant tank at the gates of the base with precision. With both arms slightly bent and legs sunk, it was like throwing a lead ball. He sent the several-ton military truck flying. The group of Hydra guards that swarmed out looked at the military truck that came whirling through the air with disbelieving and shocked eyes. Boom! A tremendous bang shook the whole base. Giant tanks were directly crushed by the military trucks and altogether scrapped. Before he could adjust the cannon, the driver got crushed like a puddle of mush like meat. The explosion from the fire lit up the night sky. The inside of the base was boiling. Taking this opportunity, Rogers quickly changed into the black uniform of a Hydra guard, put on a helmet that hid his face, and blended into the base. Those Hydra soldiers are unlucky to meet Luke. Rogers no longer doubted the strength of his friend. He finally knew what was going on behind Italy's conqueror and capturer of Rome, as advertised by the Allies. It is no wonder that every time he asked the Howling Commandos how they sneaked into Sicily and raided Venice Palace, those people always turned to praise Luke. Now, it seems that the whole process was probably Luke's doing all the way, and the others watched and cheered. The military factory, cells are in the back. Rogers, disguised as a Hydra soldier, successfully entered a military factory. Those guards carrying energy guns, prompted by the alarm, all ran outside. What is this? Along the way, Rogers saw a huge missile head. Several soldiers were tasked with embedding some blue, glowing energy blocks into it. He stuffed a piece into his pocket with the idea of collecting intelligence and then headed for the cells where the captured soldiers were held. A few minutes ago, Red Skull is standing in the command room inside the base, imagining the future and making plans. He talked about how to re-establish the Third Reich on the ruins of the war. And then, through the power of the Hydra, the whole world will be in his pocket. As for his audience, only one person, Hydra's chief scientist, Dr. Arnim Zola. Red Skull, who possessed the Tesseract, firmly believed that he was the chosen one and the future ruler of this planet. Mr. Schmidt, the Führer wants us to provide more weapons to create a chance of victory on the front lines of battle. He is no longer content with resisting the Allied push but wants to blow a counterattack. Dr. Zola said carefully. The Führer, far away from Berlin, used a commanding tone to force Hydra to make more significant efforts to create more and more powerful energy weapons to arm the soldiers of the Axis powers. If he were to repeat what was said exactly, Red Skull, who has always wanted to be independent, would be furious again. Dr. Zola felt that since he got Tesseract, the leader of Hydra's ambition had become more and more inflated, almost reaching an uncontrollable level. The Axis powers are dying. Hitler massacred Jews on a large scale because of differences in wealth and religion and provoked the Red Bear of the Soviet Union. Then he made Italy an ally, and the United States joined in. The Third Reich is about to become the public enemy of the world. The end of this war has already been decided, Zola. Red Skull had no respect for Hitler in his tone. He was once a true fanatic admirer of the Führer, for which he joined the SS and became a loyal confidant like Heinrich Luitpold Himmler for a time. However, Schmidt, who hadn't yet become Red Skull, entered the military, scientific research department, met Abraham Erskine and found the existence of the super soldier serum. In pursuit of his strength and perfection and loyalty to the Führer, Schmidt volunteered to become the first experimental subject. He became Red Skull due to the side effects of the first-generation serum. Unfortunately, Hitler later felt that Schmidt, who was disfigured, no longer fit his image of Aryan perfection. He was assigned to the newly established Hydra on the pretext of establishing a foreign intelligence department. Hitler's ship is going to sink, even if I provide a large number of weapons to the Axis. Zola, do you want to be buried with him? Red Skull sneered. Hail Hydra! Dr. Zola held his hands flat in the air and shouted the pledge of loyalty. That's the smart choice. When the Valkyrie project succeeds, and half the world falls into ruins, I will be able to build an unprecedented Hydra empire with my own hands. Red Skull's voice raised. He had complete control over Hydra since long ago and changed it from a foreign intelligence department to an independent secret organization. If not for the Allies, the Führer of the Third Reich, far away in Berlin, would have pounded the table and shouted in anger and then eliminated this colossal organization that was out of control. By the way, Dr. Zola, how is the Valkyrie project coming along? Red Skull went down to business. The so-called Valkyrie is a flying warhead embedded with blocks of Tesseract energy cubes. They were no less potent than the hydrogen bombs that hadn't been made by the United States yet. All research institutes are actively working together, and the goals have been set. New York, Berlin, London, Moscow. Valkyrie is enough to wipe out these cities and lead countless people to their deaths. Dr. Zola replied with trepidation. In his opinion, Red Skull was a madman. Not only did he want to destroy the Allies, but also the Axis powers. From the devastated ruins, the new era belonged to Hydra. That's good. What Superman, what mutant? Under Valkyrie, all beings are equal. The Tesseract is the future. Red Skull, looking frenzied, continued. One day, I will. An ear-splitting alarm interrupted the Hydra leader's voice, and he quickly activated the monitors to check the situation. In the monitor, there was a tall figure tearing through the flames in the intense, fiery light, and a fluttering dark red cloak. Its stern eyes stared straight at Red Skull through the surveillance camera. Da da da. Da da da. The submachine gun fired violently. The bullets hit the steel armor like Kryptonian battlesuit with solid kinetic energy as if they were hitting a brick wall. Can you stop aiming for my head? The corners of Luke's mouth twitched as the brass bullets shot into his chest. They didn't give him any trouble. But if the bullets hit his face, that hurts. There was still a significant gap in the defense level where his face could receive bullets, missiles, and even nuclear bombs without damage. Luke's eyes flashed, and the trajectory of the bullet seemed to slow down considerably. He stretched out two fingers, pinched a brass bullet that had slowed down, and flung it out. With a swoosh, an oncoming Hydra soldier fell to the ground. Wearing a helmet on his head, still, a fatal wound the size of a pea was exposed. Gurgling blood flowed out with air bubbles. This accuracy would get an A if Superman was part of an online courier service. Luke restrained his tedious distractions and went on a rampage. He acted like a humanoid tank that could move very fast. Whenever one of the Hydra soldiers came crashing into him, a punch went down, and they would die on the spot. As the noise increased, more soldiers flocked in, many of whom were Hydra soldiers armed with energy weapons. Under the situation of gunfire and bullets flying around, there was finally an energy cannon that hit Luke in the chest by chance. With a loud bang, he flew backward like a cannonball. Thud. Like a sledgehammer hitting an anvil, the dull sound shook his eardrums. I got him, the Hydra soldier shouted excitedly. He looked so excited, just like scoring a last-ditch kick in the World Cup. Wait, that guy. He's not dead. The joy of victory didn't last long before an incredulous cry of surprise came from the mouth of another Hydra soldier. The energy guns they use are incredibly deadly. When ordinary people were hit, it was a direct annihilation. Flesh and blood would turn into drifting ash. But that scary intruder didn't seem to be bothered much. It didn't seem to hurt as much as I thought it would. It's almost like getting hit with a hammer at 80%. Luke fell on a giant tank behind him, smashing the thick solid steel shell into a clear humanoid outline. His hands propped up behind him, shook his head, and dashed out with one step. Boom! The airflow exploded. Luke instantly approached the Hydra soldier who shot him, pressing his palm on the other's chest and pushing it gently. He dragged out a residual shadow, trailing like water. That guy bounced hard on the solid ground. Then, with a bang, flesh and blood were abruptly embedded into the solid wall. Like a tomato that stepped on, the liquid splashed everywhere. The internal organs of the human body covered the brick wall, like a highly colorful abstract painting. We're even. Luke shrugged his shoulders and turned to look at the other Hydra soldiers. The man on the screen was wearing combat clothes similar to steel armor, and his conspicuous dark red cloak looked as if it was stained with blood. One person, Red Skull, seemed to feel the gaze cast by the intruder and looked at Dr. Zola with some uncertainty. Is that Superman from the Allies? The latter shook his head. The picture on the monitor screen was too blurry for him to identify. Bang, bang, bang. Like a sharp arrow, the blurred figure flew out with such speed that it exceeded the limits of the surveillance camera. The Hydra soldier carrying the energy gun was quickly knocked out like a sandbag standing still. Within a few breaths, the entire garrison had fallen. And it seems that they won't be able to get up again. Erskine has developed a second-generation enhancement serum? Red Skull had some doubts. Simply from the combat capabilities, this suspected allied Superman intruder was ultimately better than the super soldiers. At least, Red Skull felt that he could hardly beat so many people at the same time. Moreover, some of the garrisons used submachine guns to fire. The bullets struck the steel armor like battlesuit. Surprisingly, there was no reaction. What should we do? Dr. Zola asked in a panic. Hydra's soldiers didn't look like they were a match for this intruder. He's only one man. We have so many guns and enhanced soldiers. What are you afraid of? Red Skull shouted angrily. Immediately afterward, a giant tank rumbled into action like a roaring steel monster on the monitor screen. The fort was moving and constantly adjusting its position. Superman. Even if you have a body of steel, Red Skull showed a contemptuous smile. But, the next moment, his voice abruptly stopped. The words that were to mock are swallowed back. How is that possible? Erskine has researched another serum. Damn it. I was the first super soldier. He gave the best to someone else. Red Skull growled in rage. On the monitor, the barrel of the giant tank was abruptly broken. Then, the intruder clasped the broken barrel with both hands. Like a thick club, he instantly knocked the heavy tank to the ground. This shocking scene directly caused the other Hydra soldiers to lose their will to fight. They wanted to follow the example of the French and put up white flags of surrender. Mr. Schmidt, Dr. Zola shouted in a small voice. Retreat. Back to headquarters. For the time being, we are no match for this ally's Superman. Red Skull, who had quickly recovered, took a deep breath and pressed the self-destruct sequence switch one by one. He didn't intend to leave the Valkyrie in the military factory as spoils of war for the Allies. As for the captured soldiers in Hydra's garrison, Red Skull didn't care. They were only a small sacrifice for the birth of the Hydra Empire. Even the strongest super soldier would be injured and die. Red Skull clenched his teeth and bitterly said, Superman, wait and see. The Tesseract soon appeared from a metal box in front of him. Without wasting any time, he put it in another smaller box. In his thoughts, as long as they returned to the Alps underground base, they could activate the Valkyrie and destroy both the Allies and Axis powers together. What can Superman do? He will still die in the bombing. Thud. 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 A moment later, the fierce battlefield turned silent. With the nano suit from Krypton, Luke could withstand a few energy blasts head-on, as if they were nothing. At most, they were a little annoying. The more time he spent with the Superman card, the more Luke understood why Clark Kent from the studio next door was often considered to have 0 evasion points. Because anyone with such an indestructible steel body, plus the unique healing ability, would be used to walking in a straight line, instead of wasting time dodging attacks. It is better to charge and remove the enemy. Over time, dodge has become an optional word in Superman's dictionary. I wonder how Rogers is doing over there. After spending a few minutes clearing the garrison from the base perimeter, Luke strode towards the military factory. Red Skull is probably in the command room. Luke is very interested in the Tesseract. Since the energy radiation from a star can be a source of energy for Superman to become stronger, it makes no sense that other powerful energy bodies can't. Anyway, he won't lose anything in trying. Anyway, Thanos, chief of Universal Family Planning Commission, can't hammer me across the timeline, right? Even if he comes, I might not lose to him. Luke had this idea in his head. Luke. As soon as he entered the military factory, Luke saw Rogers leading a group of captured soldiers. With Luke distracting the enemies, Captain America didn't encounter any major obstacles on his way to rescue them. Have you found Bucky? Luke scanned the area but didn't find the future Winter Soldier's figure. No, they told me Bucky was taken to an isolation ward for human trials, but I didn't see him there. Rogers' face looked somewhat anxious. He was worried whether Bucky would be taken away by Hydra for some inhumane and terrible experiment. Or perhaps, unfortunately, a subject that had been destroyed as a failed experiment. Rogers, who was at the home front, often heard about the inhumane and cruel acts of the Nazis from the mouths of some soldiers. Steve, you take these people and arm yourself to break out of Hydra's base. I'll keep looking for Bucky. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Luke spoke consolingly. It was reasonable to say that Red Skull wouldn't have taken Bucky with him, even if he had escaped. Compared with Dr. Zola, or essential information, an allied prisoner was worthless. Knock, knock. Luke's words hadn't landed yet. A tremor sounded as if the ground was shaking. The captured soldiers huddled together with fear in their eyes. Someone shouted, "Go! The monsters are coming!" Before they lost the will to fight, 4 sturdy figures more than 2 meters tall occupied everyone's attention. What's that? Luke turned his head and expressed doubts. The 4 sturdy figures walked with great strides, like a fierce battle elephant, making a terrifying commotion. Like small giants, these people's size, like water-filled balloons, inflated to over 2 meters tall. They wore German uniforms, black leather jackets clinging to their bodies, and a rather conspicuous Hydra armband on their right arms. Their faces were dry, like dried trees without water, pale and ghastly. They even smelled rotten. With a beast-like roar coming from their throats, it sent a chill down the soldiers' backs and felt it creep down their spines. This wasn't even human. Hydra's enhanced soldiers. A captured soldier trembled and answered. Luke narrowed his eyes. He remembered that last time in Rome, he had disposed of some enhanced soldiers. Just being stimulated by a bloody scene could trigger an agitated state. Becoming a senseless, painless killing machine. But these things in front of them looked like zombies. Hydra had a lot of shady technology. It feels like there's a subtle change in the timeline. Whispering to himself, Luke took a step forward and clenched his fist. The powerful and oppressive enhanced soldiers hissed like wild beasts and lunged at him. Such speed. Like a residual shadow, approaching Luke in the blink of an eye. As a super soldier, Rogers was the first to react, carrying the pathetically thin star-spangled shield and rushing forward. Luke had to say, Captain America has a soft spot for shields. Clank. Rogers, trying to help Luke and share the burden, used the star-spangled banner shield to advance. But it was split into 2 by an enhanced soldier, with one hand. Flesh and blood of his right arm were as dry as deadwood as if it were cast in steel. It thrust into his throat with heavy force. Even if they lost their self-awareness, their muscle memory, which the fires of war have brutalized, still allowed them to maintain their incredible combat power. Rip. A piercing sound. Luke ripped off the arm of the enhanced soldier. Dry, tight muscles that didn't spurt out blood. I'll go. Luke said in a low voice. With a hard shoulder slam, he knocked the close by enhanced soldier out of the way. His clenched fist swung out fiercely, and the airflow stirred, emitting a sharp hiss. The heavy cannonball-like force slammed into the rigid body of the enhanced soldier. A shocking hole was opened in his chest. Faced with another lunging enhanced soldier, Luke raised his hand and pressed his head. The formidable power of the beast-like creature, confined in the palm of his hand. A knee strike followed, and it knocked the creature to the ground. Then Luke lifted his foot and stepped on it. Boom! The head was like a ruptured watermelon, with red and bloody stuff splattered everywhere. The captured soldiers standing at the back were stunned. They opened their eyes wide and wondered if they saw an illusion. Is he the Superman of the Allies? I've seen it in the papers. Finally, someone recognized Luke. That other guy, he just said he was Captain America. The others looked at Rogers, who was also tall, and wondered, I remember you're a super soldier too, so why aren't you going? Captain America, whose shield was broken and his hands were empty, didn't know how to answer. I am a super soldier too, right? Looking at Luke, who was so strong that he was terrifying, a series of questions emerged in Rogers' head. The next day, noon, Brigadier General Luke Cavill and Captain Steve Rogers disappeared in the 3rd Region behind enemy lines. The reconnaissance team conducted a careful search and found no clues. The radio operator reported the information he received to Colonel Phillips, who was walking back and forth anxiously. The latter was livid and said nothing. Wrinkles on his face huddled together, and his eyes were full of anger. The radio operator standing in front of him was trembling, afraid that he would be affected and become the colonel's anger target. Keep the search going. Colonel Phillips slapped the table and gritted his teeth. If Luke can't be found within the next 12 hours, the military will have to put him on the death list. Once this news gets out, it will undoubtedly bring a devastating blow to the Allied forces' morale on the front line. A while ago, still, a war hero and legend who was trying to publicize his deeds suddenly died in the hands of Hydra. How would he explain this? He's afraid that when the time comes, not only will the president be furious, but the Allies will be held accountable. This is terrible. Colonel Phillips sighed heavily. He thought Luke would have a more extended development and a broader future. But who could have imagined that a rising star would fall before it could shine? Even if Luke had achieved the miraculous conquest of Italy, the possibility of surviving in the face of a Hydra base with as many as 600 people, in those giant tanks and energy guns, was still very low. The last reconnaissance plane is back. Carter hurried into the makeshift shelter tent with a stack of blurry black and white photos. Still didn't find anything. At Hydra's base, there was a shocking explosion, and the nearby buildings collapsed, which also caused a mountain fire. Fortunately, it didn't spread. Colonel Phillips was furious at the sight of the female British agent and coldly said, "What's the use of saying this, Agent Carter? We have lost a general. The Allies have lost a hero. If you had notified me in time to inform Allied command and stop Luke's recklessness, maybe none of this would have happened. The military can't do anything about Howard Stark, and he's a famous young New York billionaire and the largest weapons sponsor of the Allied forces, but you're nothing. Agent Carter, I hope you can consider the consequences of what you do in the future, right? You won't have a future. When Allied command learns of this, it will cause trouble for the Strategic Science Reserve, and then we'll all be finished." In the shelter of the camp tent, a storm-like reprimand exploded. Colonel Phillips glared at the female agent in front of him and lowered his voice. "I've said it many times, don't let your personal feelings affect your work. This is the first lesson of being a good agent." "I haven't, sir." Carter bit her lip and shook her head. "Don't worry about denying it. I haven't even said who it is. Luke, Rogers, or Howard Stark, the playboy, Agent Carter. Can you tell me who it was that made you lose your mind and risk court-martial to help him?" Colonel Phillips kept sneering, then added, "I told them, women shouldn't be involved in war. Damned Englishmen." Faced with the boss's discriminatory words, Carter breathed deeply. Her chest fluctuated but remained silent. Just as Colonel Phillips was about to give Allied command the news, the noise outside reached the camp tent, where the atmosphere seemed to have dropped below the freezing point. Just as Colonel Phillips was about to give Allied command the news, the noise outside reached the camp tent, where the atmosphere seemed to have dropped below the freezing point. Faintly, one could hear the applause and cheers. What happened? Phillips walked out of the tent in exasperation, followed by Carter. At the very front of the camp, the soldiers were standing in two lines. Not far from the tree-lined path, two familiar figures appeared. Luke and Rogers, Superman, and Captain America. A group of captured Allied soldiers followed them. In the distance, giant tanks were coming toward them with a roar. It seemed to be the captured spoils. "They're back." The soldiers were in high spirits and looked at the captured soldiers with energy guns in their hands and held their heads high with envious eyes. They looked like victors returning from a triumphant battle with pride and vigor. "What's going on?" Colonel Phillips, who walked out of the tent, asked in surprise. Those captured soldiers not only returned safely but also brought back Hydra's secret weapon. This was a huge victory. The victory belongs to the Strategic Science Reserve. It must be Superman. He led everyone to defeat Hydra and save those soldiers. A soldier guessed excitedly. Others nodded. The publicity of the Allied countries these days had already made Luke a well-known legendary figure. Everyone who returned to the camp was treated heroically. The eager guys have started to inquire what happened and how the captured soldiers escaped from Hydra. Colonel Phillips, who lost his temper just now, came out to meet this team in person. Of course, he was mainly concerned about Luke's safety. This 20-year-old brigadier general is now a legendary figure in the Allied countries. It is also a typical propaganda model introduced by the military and is the inspiration of today's countless soldiers. If Luke had an accident and died in the front line, it would cause great shock within the Allied forces. Therefore, before he asked to go to the front line, many high-level officials disagreed. Even President Roosevelt, who proposed to let Luke return to the battlefield, wanted the young brigadier to stay in the rear as a propaganda tool to stabilize people's hearts. Luke, who was only interested in building a solid foundation, accumulating qualifications and gaining reputation, would never have accepted this seemingly tempting proposal. Thoroughly defeat Hydra and lead the Allies to absolute victory. As long as it's done, no one could criticize his merits. "You've done it again, Luke." Colonel Phillips was thrilled to see Luke's triumphant return. As for Rogers, he was intentionally or unintentionally ignored. After all, the Allies only need one hero. Just as in the eyes of the world, there will always be only one sun. Some people are injured, and they need medical attention. Also, Colonel, I was too reckless in this rescue operation. I will speak to Allied command about this. Luke accepted the praise calmly. After taking care of the 4 enhanced soldiers, he and Rogers went straight to Red Skull's command room. In the end, Red Skull had already taken a plane and escaped with the Tesseract and Dr. Zola. Besides, Hydra's base was about to explode, so they couldn't continue to pursue it. Therefore, Luke only returned to camp with a group of captured soldiers and Rogers, who was depressed. Those giant tanks and energy guns that were stolen from the military factory became their trophies. The president sitting in the White House wouldn't have expected to receive your news so soon. Colonel Phillips had a smile on his face, completely missing his previous anger. They destroyed Hydra's secret base with only 2 people, took out 2 military factories and 600 Nazi guards inside. What a fantastic achievement! Intuition told Colonel Phillips that Luke could do more than that. When this war is over, he will receive even higher honors. The youngest major general in the history of the United States? Maybe even an admiral position? For the first time, Phillips felt that his imagination was relatively poor. This is a great victory for the Strategic Science Reserve. We'll celebrate with you later. Colonel Phillips glanced at Carter beside him and said with a smile. Luke is the highest officer in the camp in terms of rank and official position. He has the authority to make any decision except to disobey a direct order from Allied command. However, the young brigadier general didn't turn his back on people once he got his post and put on airs. On the contrary, Luke keeps an approachable and cordial attitude towards his former friend Rogers and his former boss Colonel Phillips. Reducing one's aggressiveness allows military bigwigs who were dissatisfied with themselves to relax their vigilance. This is what he thought inside. Do you have something to say to me? Luke smiled when he saw Carter standing in front of him. Welcome back. The usually cold female agent was silent for a long moment before saying this. Long time no see, Howard. Luke managed to get out of the crowd's adoration and cheers and return to the Strategic Science Reserve's temporary base. Walking through the gate, he saw Howard Stark, the chief scientific research consultant, was already busy in his own stuff. He had multiple roles and multiple identities. He was also the most potent weapons sponsor of the Allied forces and a clever and famous scientist. Not only did he have substantial financial resources, but he also had a strong hands-on ability, and he invented many novel things for the Allies. Many bigwigs in the Defense Department had a good impression of this arms magnate. Such talents naturally wouldn't be overlooked by the Strategic Science Reserve. In the name of scientific research consultant, Colonel Phillips enlisted Howard, even though the old-school soldier didn't like him. Luke, or do I need to call you Brigadier General, sir? Howard turned to look at him and spoke with a light smile. Congratulations on once again becoming the hero of the Allies. To be honest, I envy you. Just by giving your name, you can make countless women throw themselves at you, and I have to show my car keys, book a seat in a fancy restaurant, and show off my funny and charming side before those pretty girls are willing to sleep with me. After coming to the Strategic Science Reserve these days, Luke also had a clear understanding of Howard. Different from the later mature and serious founder of S.H.I.E.L.D. Currently, the arms magnate who led Stark Industries' rise to prominence was no different from his son. He loved to prove his powerful charm of a male by hooking up with a beautiful woman. That mouth will never spit out appreciation and affirmation to others, said to be the Stark family's usual arrogance and venom. Compared with Tony Stark, who has yet come to this world, he only had technology and women in his eyes. Howard only had one hobby over his son, that was, making money. In just a few decades, Stark Industries would have caught up with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and other established giants, trying to stand side by side with them and then overtake them. Howard's sociability and his genius brain contributed significantly to this. I guess those tricks of yours don't work all the time, do they? Luke scoffed nonchalantly. Many people say that this playboy risked going to the Strategic Science Reserve's front lines because of the cold female agent, Peggy Carter. The other party wanted to pick this delicate, charming, and thorny red rose and kiss it. It's a pity that Carter ignored him and refused a date invitation many times. After that flight, Carter and I went to eat cheese fondue. Howard was smug, like a victorious soldier. Mr. Stark, you think I don't know that cheese fondue is cheese and bread, right? If eating bread together is considered to win a woman over, they won't half of all the women in New York have had sex with you? Luke deliberately sneered. What do you know? You have to be patient with women. Howard wasn't angry. Instead, he assumed the attitude of an elder and taught, you have to be like Don Quixote who charged at the windmill, failed and started all over again. At the same time, don't be too deprived and show great eagerness. It will make the other party feel that your feelings are too cheap and they wouldn't take you seriously, but be caring and attentive, and appear at any time. If a woman's heart is a solid castle, then I must be the best sieging tactician in the entire world. Since Carter agreed to have dinner with me, it's not long before we get closer. Seeing Howard's unabashed praise of himself, Luke smiled lightly. The other person's appearance was quite similar to his son's. It seems that narcissism was also one of the Stark family's traditions. However, in Luke's view, Howard was a successful businessman and a top scientist globally. Compared to his son, Iron Man's father was better in all aspects. The first is Tony Stark's high-tech armor, which uses the arc reactor as its core. Howard developed it as early as a century ago, but due to the material conditions and the time's limitations, he couldn't meet the downsizing requirements. Otherwise, no matter how clever Tony is, to design an unprecedented cold fusion energy source by hammering out a suit of armor in a dark and humid cave was a fantasy. His father had already paved the way to become a superhero. Later, Tony, who became Iron Man, was troubled by palladium poisoning, and the new element that solved the problem was first discovered by Howard and left for his son. In other words, his father's brain was ahead of its time. Tony's future success is that Stark Industries provided strong financial backing and solid technical support. More importantly, he inherited the knowledge left by his father. That was the most precious legacy. I've heard that you stole a fighter contract from Lockheed Martin and recently won a contract for a passenger jet that was supposed to go to them, and there's been some discontent from the Defense Department. Luke said casually. Howard, who was busy studying Hydra's energy weapon, looked a little ugly and bitterly said, I told my secretary about this problem. There is fierce competition among peers, which is inevitable. If Lockheed Martin is dissatisfied, let their researchers work hard to keep up with my talented brain. Just now, Howard, who was so charming and imparted tips on how to flirt with girls, turned into a poisonous person in an instant. It's clear that Lockheed Martin, indeed, had placed some considerable pressure on Stark Industries. Why, Brigadier General Sir, are you going to lend a helping hand to help Stark Industries tide over the difficulties? As a wise man, Howard quickly read the other meanings in Luke's words. With all due respect, you may not be able to get involved in this kind of thing. The man at Stark Industries' helm was very discreet, saying that Luke's current position may not be helpful. After all, the military rank on a shoulder patch is one thing, but the actual power you have is another. Unless Luke could sit in Eisenhower's position, maybe he can talk. The future is anybody's guess, isn't it, Howard? Luke surveyed the new weapons belonging to the Strategic Science Reserve and glanced down at a silvery circular shield. Can I have this? Steve's going to love it. Luke surveyed the new weapons belonging to the Strategic Science Reserve and glanced down at a silvery circular shield. Can I have this? Steve's going to love it. Lost in thought, Howard waved his hand and motioned Luke to take whatever he wanted. Anyway, from the military title, the opponent should be the leader of the Strategic Science Reserve. But are you sure Rogers will use this thing? It's just an unfinished product. Aware of Luke's vague intention to cooperate, Howard's attitude changed a bit. He is a pure businessman, far from having many noble sentiments and good qualities. An arms dealer who expects to make a fortune in war can't take moral conscience seriously. As for patriotism, it's something that will be awakened only after he reached the top of his career. Just like how only successful entrepreneurs would be keen on charity and showing their compassion. Trust me. Steve is going to love it at first sight. I don't want to see him carrying a trash can lid into battle. Luke said with a smile. Perhaps he was beaten since childhood and often used a trash can lid from the roadside as a weapon, which caused Captain America to prefer fighting with his shield. The shield is made of a special material called vibranium, which has a special ability to absorb kinetic energy and barely transmits heat or kinetic energy. To some extent, it is indestructible. Howard explained. It's a pity that this material is too rare. There's no way to equip the whole army. Seeing Howard's regretful expression, Luke's eyes flashed. He did know that somewhere there existed a considerable amount of vibranium veins. Wakanda. A seemingly backward but technologically advanced, third-world country that was performing exceedingly poorly, hidden in the mountains of the African continent, few people knew its existence so far. I have to drop by sometime. Luke looked at the shield in his hand, which reflected his young face. As it turned out, Luke was right. When Rogers got the silver round shield, he was like a child who got a beloved toy and kept fiddling with it. It felt convenient. This is the best gift I've received since we left Brooklyn. Rogers smiled a little, then took the shield in his hand and made a few iconic gestures. He was still worried about the safety of his friend Bucky, and he was a little depressed. But Luke's arrival made it a lot easier for Rogers. Luke, what happened to Bucky? Captain America, with a worried look in his eyes, frowned and asked. He felt that Luke always had a lot of solutions to various problems. I asked the captured soldiers. They said Bucky was probably moved. Luke, who returned to the barracks, responded. He did get some clues that no one else would pay attention to. For example, in Hydra's secret base, a group of prisoners would be transferred every few weeks. Almost 200 people of the 107th Infantry Regiment were kept in the military factories as free labor. But in the end, only about 120 soldiers managed to escape with Luke and Rogers. Excluding those who died of overwork and casualties, there were still about 15 people unaccounted for. They had the same experience as Bucky. They were all taken to the isolation ward of the military factory and never came out again. Moreover, when a British soldier worked as a laborer in a factory, he heard Dr. Zola mention the name, Baron Strucker. Coincidentally, Luke knew what it stood for. Therefore, he concluded that Bucky was probably moved to another place by Hydra. I hope so. Bucky doesn't know yet. I'm already on the front line. This was going to be a planned surprise. Rogers bowed their heads and said so. He always wanted to tell Bucky the good news in person and enjoy the look of surprise on his friend's face. Before Luke appeared, only Bucky accompanied him, and the two of them were very close. Don't think about these unsolvable problems. Make good preparations. Colonel Phillips will hold a celebration party in the evening. When the time comes, there will undoubtedly be a lot of girls asking you to dance. Luke changed the subject and deliberately joked, I heard you were hugging a civilian this afternoon, an enthusiastic girl, who wanted to thank you for the families of the captured soldiers. Rogers turned red, coughed twice, and spoke in embarrassment. It was an accident. I don't have much experience, and she just hugged me. Luke, you know, I never knew how to refuse others. After listening to Captain America's tongue-tied pale defense, Luke smiled and continued to make fun of it. That's true. Who would refuse a beautiful girl who offered a kiss? By the way, Steve, don't tell me it was your first kiss. How is that possible? Rogers blushed, the veins stood out on his forehead, and he argued, me and Janice, and Amy. But Bucky said, that was when you were 8 or 9 years old. Does playing house with girls count? Looking at Captain America's trying very hard to understand his own emotional experience, Luke laughed. the camp was filled with a pleasant atmosphere. When Rogers was in a good mood, he left the barracks to prepare the party's clothes. Luke, who was sitting alone in the same place, seemed to be thinking about something. He was thinking about Baron Straker, mentioned by Dr. Zola. The opponent's real name is Wolfgang von Strucker. Born in Bavaria, Germany, he was a member of the Führer's inner circle and Baron Zemo, who was well known in the Nazi Party. Unlike Red Skull's ambition, Strucker still had deep feelings for the Third Reich and was bent on defeating the Allies and helping the Axis countries win the war. It's worth mentioning that although Baron Strucker is the top leader of Hydra, he isn't in the same camp as Red Skull. He has his own research institute and technological strength and has created a virus weapon called Death Spores, which has harvested many lives from the Allied countries. If one thinks about it, the Allies were miserable, being crushed to the ground by the Axis powers' various shady tech and science. Luke thought silently. No wonder a German major shouted the slogan, "German technology is the best in the world." After a quick cleaning and a change into a new uniform, Luke and Rogers walked into a pub in a nearby town. As the noise poured in, the air was filled with the scent of malt and the pale blue haze of burning low-quality tobacco. Those captured soldiers who escaped by luck and returned successfully drank cups of hard liquor or gathered together to play cards and arm wrestle. Some people were even ready to have a wrestling match on the spur of the moment. From time to time, there was a burst of laughter from the soldiers who filled the pub. The buzzing sound made the ceiling overhead shake slightly, and the light bulbs hanging from it swayed. "Our heroes are here." Dum Duggan, who was sitting at the bar, caught a glimpse of Luke standing at the door and immediately shouted. He tapped his glass against the bar table like a rhythmic drumbeat, drawing everyone's attention. The soldiers spontaneously stopped everything else, and everyone stood up and applauded. The whole pub looked like it was about to topple over. Those adoring gazes and grateful glances turned into a round of applause for Luke. This is the respect for a war hero, they're so enthusiastic. Applause and cheers lasted for 2 minutes. Rogers sat down beside his friend and handed a glass of whiskey on the rocks. "Have you chosen your partner for the dance?" Luke picked up his glass and poured the cold, hot liquid into his throat, giving him a rush of relief. "Why don't I know that?" Rogers opened his eyes wide. He hadn't heard that there was a dance at the celebration. Captain America still thought that Luke was joking in the barracks and that it was a little too much to hold a party before the war was won. "Howard told me. He has already chosen his target for tonight." Luke smiled and tapped Rogers on the shoulder and said, "That's the lucky one who took Captain America's first kiss. She looks good, with beautiful blonde hair. See, she's staring at you with passionate eyes." "Steve, you're gonna get it tonight." His best friend's teasing made Rogers feel annoyed. After all, in America's culture, a 20-year-old boy with no emotional experience is a bit unjustifiable, comparable to a pure white sheet. Not everyone is like Howard Stark. Rogers lowered his voice and raised his glass to hide his embarrassed expression. "All right, no more jokes." Luke cleared his throat and looked severe. Then, it wasn't long before he leaned his head and asked with a smile, "So, Captain America, are you prepared to give up your virginity tonight?" Poof! Rogers, who was drinking, spit out his mouthful of whiskey. The sudden noise caused the bar crowd to burst into laughter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Rogers is scrambling around, explaining to the innocent bartender while glaring at Luke. However, the latter had already slipped away and disappeared up the stairs to the pub's second floor. "Bastard." The always decent Rogers, for once, burst out a foul word. Half an hour later, the drunken soldiers gradually left the scene. Everyone who heard the news of the dance ran to the second floor early. The desks and chairs had been emptied, and a vast space had been drawn. An old-fashioned phonograph was placed by the window, and the soothing and quiet music melody flowed out of it and echoed on the second floor. The soldiers, with impure purposes, looked at the women in the room with subtle and implicit eyes. Some of them were unmarried field nurses, some were young girls carefully selected by the local mayor, and some were civilian staff of the Strategic Science Reserve. They were like delicate flowers, in the beautiful stage of budding, waiting for someone to pick them. "General, I've always wondered." Duggan, nicknamed Dum Dum, touched his beard and asked, "These guys ultimately aim to get women into bed and aren't interested in dancing at all. Then why don't they just say what they want, so they could save time, skip to the crucial step, and spend more time on what they want?" "Duggan, tell me, when you proposed to your wife, did you put a gun to her head?" Otherwise, why could she promise to marry you? Luke joked and handed the glass to his partner. Later, the young brigadier general of the Allied forces solemnly explained, human beings are very complex animals. In social situations, men try their best to show their humor to attract women's interest and lay the foundation for further in-depth communication. Women also know what men are doing, but they enjoy it and call it affection. But in reality, it is just dopamine secretion in the brain so that both parties produce the mating impulse. You go to any woman and tell her, let's skip all the steps, get down to business, and finish the bodily fluid exchange. What do you think? She would give you a clean slap and treat you as a pervert. But in a different way, you go up to someone, invite them for a drink, tell a few funny jokes, talk about your experiences. Don't care if they're true or not, just charming enough to be interesting and attractive. When the mood is right, you can ask to go to her room or let her visit your room. If you are strong enough, she will snuggle up to you and say, you are the best man I have ever met. Do you understand, Duggan? With straightforwardness, you will end up being treated as a pervert. The only way to harvest the prey is to speak eloquently. Dum Dum was confused. He could marry his wife back then purely because of good luck. Luke, I'm impressed with you. I didn't expect you to have such a brilliant perspective. In the future, we can discuss more and exchange more when we have time. Luke, leaning against the bar, saw Howard coming over. The arms magnate is dressed up very flamboyantly, with a suit and vest, trousers, and leather shoes. His hair was combed and shiny, and his mustache was carefully groomed. You're better at this. I am just an armchair strategist with rich theoretical knowledge. Luke smiled and admitted defeat. Flirting was Stark's family heritage, he couldn't compare. You're better at this. I am just an armchair strategist with rich theoretical knowledge. Luke smiled and admitted defeat. Flirting is Stark's family heritage, he can't compare. Howard nodded modestly and accepted the compliment of the young brigadier general generously. It has been proven that one of the best ways for men to get closer to each other is to talk about women. Dum Dum, who has always been prejudiced against rich people, was already talking and drinking with Howard in 20 minutes. The former is interested in the anecdotes about this playboy hooking up with a Hollywood starlet, while the latter lacked comic relief. The two of them hit it off immediately and had a great conversation. Steve, come and listen to Howard's field lesson. Luke saw Captain America walking up the stairs and waved. Rogers has always had a good personality. After receiving a glass of whiskey, he put Luke's previous teasing behind him. 4 people leaned against the bar, drinking and watching the young men and women singing and dancing. Howard, why aren't you dancing? Luke had some doubts. Howard, a flirt by nature, was willing to be a bachelor instead of having fun. This is quite rare. The real professionals are always the last to make an appearance. Howard touched his mustaches and smiled faintly. A few minutes later, he saw Carter, in a red dress with beautiful curves, ascending to the 2nd floor. He raised his hand to straighten the knot of his tie, picked up a cup of gin, smiled, and walked past with pride. I bet he would only last for 2 minutes at most. Luke opened the betting pool. 5 minutes, 8 minutes. Dum Dum and Rogers said, respectively. After Howard's advice, they both agreed that the other was a veteran of the trade. 3 cups of gin. Within a minute of Luke placing his bet, Howard was back at the bar with his head down. Drink. 6 cups of gin were lined up. Dum Dum and Rogers were drinking wildly. Thought you were a real pro. Dum Dum, who was tongue-tied and unable to speak clearly, looked at Howard, who failed in inviting her, with a look of contempt. The latter grunted twice but had no words to say. At least I dare to charge at the iceberg while you're hiding on the sidelines. Howard, who really couldn't find a reason, could only save face in this way. Steve, you give it a try. Luke encouraged Captain America, but fortunately, the other party never got drunk, stayed sober, and shook his head to refuse. Even Howard, who claimed to have wandered among the flowers for so many years and never lost, suffered a defeat. You can imagine the fate of a rookie like him. Duggan? This guy is down for the count. When Luke turned his head, Dum Dum was already lying on the bar table, fast asleep. Goodbye, everyone. I'm going to find a young girl with a big heart and bury my head in her chest to soothe my fragile little heart. Howard, a veteran of the trade, quickly emerged from the shadow of defeat, looking across the table at the busty girl opposite, waiting for an invitation. Long brown hair, beautiful face, delicate and lovely, especially big-hearted, making people unable to move their eyes. Rogers, watching Howard go away, Luke turned to Captain America. In the end, the blonde girl who took Rogers' first kiss came up to him enthusiastically. So, I'm the only one left. After leaving an apologetic look, Rogers was dragged onto the dance floor by the blonde girl, leaving Luke alone at the bar, drinking alone but still not drunk. The night outside was getting darker and darker, but the pub's second floor was getting livelier and livelier. Don't you like dancing, General Cavill? The cold voice rang in Luke's ear. He put down his glass and smiled. That's not true. I didn't find a suitable partner, so I had to stay here alone. General Cavill, you seem to be a little confused as to why none of the women who are usually so enthusiastic about you, didn't one come and invite you to dance? Carter, dressed in a red dress and glowing, picked up Luke's unfinished drink from the bar and drank it all. Miss Carter, do you know why? Luke asked in a light-hearted tone. I told them you already had a scheduled partner. Carter's words rang true, but the delicate beads of sweat coming from the tip of her nose, the vigorous beating of her heart, and the rich pheromone scent betrayed her. I thought Miss Carter would hate people like me, just like you refused Howard. A flirtatious and loose person shouldn't be the type of person you would like. Luke took a step forward and said with a small smile at the corner of his mouth, or do you see through my ostentatious surface and understand that I have a stable and profound inner substance? I just like challenging tasks and love adventure. Carter answered in a nonchalant tone. The following day, when Luke, Rogers, and Howard showed up outside the barracks simultaneously, the scene was a little awkward. Everyone has a tacit agreement to smile. Even Rogers, who had no knowledge in this area, also followed the two. Everyone seemed to know what happened last night. Good morning, Luke and Steve. Are you up for your morning workout too? Howard coughed twice, pretending to ask. Ignoring his messy hair like a chicken coop, loose tie, untied shoelaces and other obvious clues. He opened his mouth and said he was getting up early to exercise. I thought you spent so much energy last night, and you should be tired enough, but I didn't know you could still get up in the morning to exercise. Luke teased. Oh, what about you, Luke? I didn't expect you to pick the most delicate red rose in the barracks without a word. You're the one who's hiding something. Howard fought back, not to be outdone. His tone was sour. Before, he pursued Carter, but the other party was unmoved and indifferent. However, Luke didn't do anything, but he picked off the thorny rose quickly. This made Howard, who had always been invincible in love, feel depressed. You won't believe me if I told you that nothing happened with Miss Carter last night. Luke shrugged his shoulders. As expected, he received a suspicious look and a scornful laugh. Come on. It's like an alcoholic saying he didn't drink too much, and a politician saying he served the citizens. It's unconvincing. Howard chuckled, clearly unconvinced. A lone man and woman disappeared after one dance and didn't show up until the following day. Could it be watching the stars and moon and talking about life's ideals all night? Rogers nodded and agreed. It was clear that he had grown a lot after an immersive first experience overnight. Tell me, how did you do it? Howard looked curious. He wanted to know where he lost. On looks. Well, Luke is young and handsome, but isn't he more attractive as a mature and rich man? On achievement? Although Luke is a war hero of the Allies, he is known as Superman to the world. But in the scientific field, Howard Stark is also a rising star. A rising genius who hopes to rival Robert Oppenheimer and Leo Szilard. Since you asked in good faith, I won't hide it. Miss Carter said she was deeply attracted to me when she first saw me. She thinks I'm like a firefly in the night, so bright and outstanding. Howard was stunned on the spot. After seeing Luke's playful eyes, he realized that this guy was just *TTING and spat viciously. Patooey. With his family's education, he shouldn't have behaved in such a rude manner. If I hadn't been unable to beat you, I would have thrown a punch at you. Howard turned around and walked away but almost twisted his back because of the excessive movement. Finally, he left awkwardly, with one hand on his waist and a staggering gait. I can tell by the look on your face that you had a good night. Luke hooked Roger's shoulder with his arm, and they walked to the barracks. He remembered that someone always talked about one topic in his previous life, whether Captain America was a 70-year-old virgin. Looking at it now, definitely not. Her name is Marjorie. Rogers squirmed. He isn't quite used to this kind of conversation. In the afternoon, Luke, who had finished his rest, entered the war room and heard Colonel Phillips roar. John Schmidt should be put in an insane asylum. He stood in front of a map, looking shocked and angry. Rogers, Carter, and Howard were all sitting at the long table, and their faces were exceptionally grave. The rest of the senior officers were silent and remained quiet. The atmosphere of the whole room fell to a freezing point as if the air was frozen. "What's the matter?" Luke asked, frowning. When the angry Colonel Phillips saw him, his tone slowed down and patiently explained. "Red Skull wants to destroy half of the world, starting with New York, and even Berlin in the Axis. We must stop him." Colonel Phillips's finger jabbed hard at the red dot on the map. These were some of the Allied and Axis powers' most important cities, including New York, London, and even Berlin. The hearts of the people who were present sank, and these were densely populated and prosperous metropolises. Once Hydra's plan was successfully implemented, the casualties would be incalculable. The Strategic Science Reserve found this information from Hydra Base's command room, a map and detailed information about Red Skull's plans. When they fled, they had no time to destroy or take them away. It was seen by Rogers, who was searching for his friend Bucky and remembered it in his head. "Schmidt is studying mysterious force beyond our understanding. If we let him cross the Atlantic Ocean, he could destroy the whole East Coast in an hour." Howard's affirmative tone made the atmosphere in the war room turn even more depressing. As the Strategic Science Reserve chief scientist, he specially studied the blue energy block that Captain America stashed in his pocket at the military factory. It was powerful and impressive. That was the conclusion Howard came to. He just extracted a tiny particle from it, prepared to analyze it, and nearly killed himself. Luke, in a time of crisis, Colonel Phillips ignored his superior and subordinate titles. "I have sent reports to Allied Command in the White House. The President wants you to step forward and stop Hydra's plan. Right now, only you can do it. In 24 hours, Red Skull will implement his crazy plan." In the war room, all eyes were focused on Luke. The Allies need a hero to save the world. And he was the most suitable candidate. The young brigadier general had created one miracle after another. Capture Rome, Italy, assist the Allied forces to land in Sicily, destroy Hydra's secret base, and rescue the captured soldiers. All kinds of legendary and marvelous deeds were enough to prove Luke's strength. He was known as Superman and Savior of the Allies, not without reason. "Steve, you must know where Hydra's headquarters is, right?" Luke's calm face showed a faint smile. "There's an underground base in the Alps. That's where Hydra's headquarters is located." Rogers answered with absolute certainty. "Would you like to go with me to destroy it and stop Red Skull's evil plan?" After hearing the answer, Luke showed a calm smile. This calm attitude infected the people in the room. "I will obey your instructions unconditionally, Commander." Rogers held his head high, without fear in his eyes. In his view, the operation was bound to be dangerous. But as Luke's friend and soldier of the Allies, he naturally had a duty to participate. "Brigadier General Sir, take me with you." With Dum Dum Dugan's initiative, members of the Howling Commandos echoed in succession. They received honors and applause from Luke's wise leadership. The Howling Commandos admired and respected this young commander from the bottom of their hearts. "That's good. You all have 2 hours to tidy up your equipment, and then we'll set off." Luke didn't say much. The impassioned speech was unnecessary, and the final victory was the key. After receiving the reply, everyone in the war room dispersed. Carter stood up, her fingers unconsciously swiping across the table. She originally wanted to say something, but her lips only pursed twice, and she left without saying a word. Luke grimaced. There was no happy ending in being a gentleman. The snowy Alps and the whistling cold winds were like whips that beat down on everyone. Luke, wearing a thin brigadier general's uniform, stood upright in the snow and ice. He wasn't affected by the weather at all. According to the original timeline, Steve would attack the underground base in the Alps and raid Hydra's headquarters. Captain America must break into the enemy camp alone, creating an opportunity to attract Red Skull's attention. Then, Howling Commandos came down from the sky and beat Hydra to the ground. However, this time Rogers didn't have to take such risks. With Luke as the main attacker, he only needed to lead the Howling Commandos and hold off Hydra's soldiers. "Are you going in alone?" Despite watching Luke break into Hydra's base alone, overturn trucks and smash tanks, Rogers still had some worries. After all, no one knows what secret weapons Red Skull had hidden in there. "Rest assured. After half an hour, start moving," Luke said in a relaxed tone, indicating that it wasn't a big deal. The only thing Red Skull could rely on was Hydra's exceptional forces and the powerful weapons created from extracting the Tesseract's energy. His combat power seemed 50-50 against Rogers, considering that Captain America could easily go against Iron Man, Thor, and even Thanos. To be able to fight with Rogers at 50-50 is probably a compliment for Red Skull. Luke, do you think Bucky will be in this base? Rogers put down the binoculars in his hand, and he was still thinking about his long-lost friend who went missing. I don't know. According to my information, Bucky might be transferred to another Hydra research facility in Germany. Luke had no time to search for Baron Strucker's whereabouts. He could only hope that the next time he sees Bucky, he hadn't already become the emotionless assassin. Various countries are studying programs like the Super Soldier program. Germany's Aryan Superman, the Soviet Union's Winter Soldier, and the British also have legends of strange and mysterious things like wizards, werewolves, and vampires. In short, it was a crazy time. People worshipped supernatural power and regarded powerful creatures as gods. I can already feel the butterfly's wings starting to flap. Luke thought silently. As he became increasingly involved in the plot, the original timeline was gradually shifting. A numinous intuition reminded him that there would be even more unpredictable things happening in the future. 30 minutes passed quickly. Luke converged his thoughts and looked at the snowy mountains. The secret Hydra headquarters is hidden deep in the canyon. At the same time, the Alps, Hydra headquarters. Red Skull is giving his final speech to his loyal and passionate followers before ruling the world. He wore a black leather outfit that showed off his skinless redhead without hiding it. In the past, Red Skull needed to disguise himself with a mask as an average person to avoid those strange eyes that were either frightened or unaccepting. But it isn't necessary now. He is about to sit on the throne as the ruler of the world. And an unprecedented empire will be born. His excessive ambition and self-confidence made Red Skull disdain hiding his natural face. What's more, for those passionate believers who he brainwashed, this ferocious and horrible appearance not only didn't arouse resentment and fear but brought sincere awe and obedience. The Hydra will win this war. Valkyrie will cast down the wrath of the gods and burn all those who defy us to ashes. Behind Red Skull is a new type of aircraft with the Valkyrie warhead. In another 2 hours, the Axis powers will launch counter-attacks against the Allies at his suggestion. He had already prepared a group of faithful believers who would give their lives for Hydra. When the time comes, they will fly the plane and drop Valkyrie on the targeted cities and end the war once and for all. If one plane is shot down, hundreds more will retaliate with the greatest fury. Red Skull raised his glass, and his voice was strong and clear. If they cut off one head, 2 more shall take its place. Hail Hydra! Hail Hydra! The many fanatics dressed in uniform below shouted with their hands raised flat in the air. At this moment, Red Skull felt extremely satisfied and confident inside. He considered himself the chosen one, a better leader than the Führer who led the Third Reich to sound the drums of war and defeat. I will rule this world. The Hydra Empire will rise. Red Skull had the same dream as every ambitious person. Rumble, a loud explosion came, and a sharp alarm sounded, alarming the whole base. This Hydra leader's fantastic fantasy came to an abrupt end. What happened? Red Skull asked angrily. If there was any bad news, couldn't they wait for 2 hours to tell him? He needed to destroy the Axis and the Allies and build a new world from the ashes. Red Skull was very dissatisfied, being forcefully pulled out from his beautiful dream of ruling the world. The Crimson Head looked especially gruesome. That, Allied Superman again. He's coming in. A Hydra soldier replied in a panic. What a bunch of trash, damn Erskine. Red Skull spoke in a somber tone and let out a low curse. As early as in the secret base in Kleinberg, he had seen the horror of the Allied Superman. Invincible and powerful, it was an enhanced version of the super soldier. Even if they sent the only 4 enhanced soldiers they had on hand right now, they could only block him for a few extra minutes. I should have joined hands with Sebastian Shaw. Red Skull thought with some regret. If it weren't for fear of Sebastian Shaw snatching the Tesseract, he would indeed have an alliance with those mutants. After all, they all belonged to the same Axis camp, and the Superman of the Allies was the real enemy that required unanimity to fight against. Unfortunately, the leader of the Hellfire Club was also ambitious and challenging to control. The other side may not submit to Hydra's leadership, let alone willingly serve as a weapon in Red Skull's hands. Go out and meet the enemy. resist the American Superman, and the world belongs to Hydra. With a wave of his hand, Red Skull sent out many of his men to resist the Allied Superman's attack. Red Skull quickly boarded the plane behind him, carrying a suitcase containing the magic cube. Those loyal Hydra soldiers were just cannon fodder. He had no spare time to pay attention to the Allied Superman's surprise attack. The Valkyrie plan needs to start early. As long as the plane crosses the Atlantic Ocean, it will destroy America's east coast. Then, it can erase other target cities. Without the leadership of the Allies and the Third Reich, they would be in chaos. At that time, he will take the lead in standing up and reforming the Axis camp through Hydra, which will naturally defeat the leaderless Allies. As for the frightening Allied Superman, Dr. Zola, I not only want you to use the energy of the Tesseract in your weapons, I also want you to speed up human testing. Red Skull boarded the plane, came to the cockpit, and viciously said so. I want to be as strong as Luke Cavill. No, even more powerful than him. Dr. Zola looked bitter. According to the blood sample provided by Red Skull, the most he could do was reverse the inferior qualities. Those enhanced soldiers who have no self-awareness are injected with inferior products. Right now, it was utterly impossible to reach the level of the Allied Superman. Who knew what kind of improvement Abraham Erskine made to the serum? I'll try, Mr. Schmidt, Dr. Zola reluctantly replied. Red Skull, who received the reply, sat in the pilot's seat and put the Tesseract in the metal instrument into the central hub. He could envision the spectacular sight of mushroom clouds rising everywhere above the Earth. When Luke broke into the base's bottom level, he saw the new plane Red Skull was riding in, which had already been fired and warmed up, slowly taxiing on the tarmac. Rogers, this is yours. Luke turned to Captain America at the door, sending him a circular shield. Steve then used this vibranium shield to topple the Hydra soldiers who had surrounded him. Dong. Dong. That was quite a rhythm. Captain America took out the enemy with a few easy shots. The sense of combat power has greatly improved. Luke, who witnessed this scene, couldn't help but come up with this idea. No problem. Make sure to stop Red Skull, Luke. Rogers swung his right hand, knocked down the enemy with a shield, took time to turn around, and said so. Immediately afterward, he threw the vibranium shield with incredible defensive power. After continuously knocking down 2 Hydra soldiers, the circular shield drew an arc that violated physics laws and flew back to Rogers. Sure enough, Captain America with his shield is essential. Luke smiled, took a deep breath, and ran towards the airplane, which was speeding up. His legs' muscles were strong, propelling his body like a sharp arrow. Those Hydra soldiers who tried to stop them were overestimating themselves. They were either thrown out or thrown to the ground. Luke was like Moses, parting the sea. With his steel-like body, Luke abruptly cut a path. Colonel Phillips, who led the Allied forces to the bottom, watched the running figure and couldn't help thinking, Erskine's serum has created a super soldier beyond imagination, and... He glanced at Rogers waving his shield and continued, a regular super soldier. As super soldiers, why are there so many differences between them? Carter, next to him, couldn't help but wonder. She read Dr. Erskine's experimental report found that the injected serum's concentration and dose were the same. But in the end, the results were very different. Maybe it was a little wrong to say this. It would hurt Rogers' self-esteem. However, the combat power demonstrated by both sides was indeed true. How could I understand those sciencey things? But it may be related to Rogers' physical quality. He used to be a weak little man, but now he has grown into a big man. Colonel Phillips gave a clear-cut analysis and said so with certainty. Carter was speechless and could only gently stand on tiptoe, gazing with complicated eyes at the sturdy figure that was gradually blurring. Red Skull's plane was about to leave the ground as it raced along the tarmac. Luke followed closely behind him. The strong wind caused by the propeller blew the straight military uniform tightly to his body. With a long jump, wear the suit. The Kryptonian suit, like steel armor, covered his whole body, and the propeller rotating at high speed hit the surface, making a harsh noise of metal colliding. *T. I almost got disfigured. Luke touched the small cut on his face and climbed the pulley that the plane was retracting with both hands. Entering the interior, he saw the names of different cities printed on Valkyrie missiles. There's New York, Chicago, and so on. Side quests. The arrival of a new era, the destruction of Hydra. Requirements. Defeat Red Skull. Reward. Green Lantern Corpse Disc, disposable power ring substitute. Luke, who saw a quest pop up, felt his body was full of motivation. He took significant strides, and all the Hydra soldiers who got in his way were knocked to the ground. You can't run away this time, Mr. Schmidt. Soon Luke appeared in the spacious cockpit. You're quite persistent, General Cavill. In the pilot's seat, Red Skull turned his chair and looked directly at Luke, who tore open the metal door with both hands. What can the Allies give you? A hero's title. Meaningless verbal compliment. Trust me, General Cavill, when the war is over, they will throw you aside. Do you know why? During the war, you're a great hero and a brave soldier. But without enemies, those politicians will start to be wary of you and afraid of you. What if one day, Superman, with his body of steel, wanted to be a dictator and tyrant? They can't help but have this idea in their heads. Once the seeds of fear take root, they will thrive. That's the advice of a man who's been there before, General Cavill. Unbearable. Luke curled his lips and whispered, Mr. Schmidt, are you going to persuade me to join the Axis powers? Isn't it a little late? No, 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 General Cavill. This is from the bottom of my heart. You and I are super soldiers. We're different from normal people so that we can see the road ahead very clearly. Red Skull stepped out of the seat. The plane had already been set to autopilot. It won't be long before this large new aircraft follows its intended course and devastates the planet. Dr. Zola, who stayed by Red Skull's side, is a scientist. On this occasion, he was useless, so he could only hide and shiver. I used to serve Hitler and was his loyal follower. The short-sighted Führer had a secret institute called Ahnenerbe that specialized in the study of supernatural forces. The leader of Hydra is trying to shake Luke's mind by using all his brainpower and his lifelong eloquence. At that time, I thought that Hitler, who believed in occultism, was seeking the truth and the way to become a god. But he's just addicted to astrology, ancient writing, the lance of Longinus, all these tedious things, relying on cocaine and morphine to keep his fantasies alive. So, I began to pursue the real miracle myself. I saw a clue in the Nordic mythology and found the secret of Odin's treasure. I have the key to open the way to godhood. General Cavill, beings as powerful as we are, shouldn't have to fight for a nation, an organization. The future has no flag. We should bring all humankind to their knees and lead them to create a new and better world. Luke shook his head gently and said with a calm tone, Mr. Schmidt, I am very disappointed. Spending so much time and patiently listening to you finish this long speech didn't surprise me at all. Instead of doing all this useless work, why don't you just give me the Tesseract? Honestly, I don't necessarily have to kill you. Handing over to the Allies is also a good option. Red Skull just knew it was hard to make this young general turn around and switch to his side. But what the Hydra leader failed to realize is that Luke wasn't a super soldier, and his future was not limited to the planet beneath his feet. I'm disappointed, too, General Cavill. We shouldn't be enemies. You're the most perfect super soldier I have ever seen. Red Skull pulled out a remote control and spoke in a deep voice, there are 21 Valkyrie missiles on this plane. I can detonate them immediately, this is my last resort. Even a Superman, no matter how indestructible you are, you will be blown to pieces. General Cavill, join the Hydra. When the great empire is established, you, like me, will become the ruler of the new world. Luke was speechless. Such a threat was too weak to deter. If not for him not wanting to take too many chances, he would like to try what it's like to be hit by 21 Valkyrie missiles. After all, Superman is incomplete without a nuclear bomb exploding on his head. Although I am currently a lower version, trying, the slightly less powerful than the nuclear version, the Valkyrie missile, shouldn't be troublesome. Thinking of this, Luke's eyes rose with a gleam of eager anticipation. General Cavill, I'm serious. I'm going to press it. Seeing Luke walking at a firm pace, Red Skull was dumbfounded. He didn't expect this allied Superman to have such a noble conscience that he would rather sacrifice his own life to stop Hydra's Valkyrie. I said, don't come any closer, we'll all explode into fireworks. Red Skull, who was clutching the remote control in his hand, hesitated and subconsciously took a step back. Despite his ruthless look, he was reluctant when he thought that he hadn't completed his dream of ruling the world and establishing the Hydra Empire. Even if you have a strong, ambitious heart, faced with near success, there's no way to be decisive about death within reach of the end. General Cavill, you want to defend the Allies even at the cost of your own life. What a stupid idea. Red Skull tried to wake up Luke, but when he saw the steady footsteps and determined face, the following words got stuck in his throat, and he couldn't spit them out. He realized that no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the other's mind. Even the threat of death couldn't stop Luke. This golden spirit of giving up oneself to save the world had somewhat moved Red Skull. Erskine once said that the serum would uncover the dark side of humankind, the better the good, the worse the bad. Does it mean that Luke Cavill could gain more power than the super soldier because he was of high moral character and honest? The leader of Hydra didn't want to believe it. He always sneered at the justice and kindness affirmed by humankind. Boom! Luke seized the opportunity and dashed past with one step. He knocked Red Skull to the ground with his hand, and the remote control that would detonate the Valkyrie missile was crushed by his foot. He looked down at his opponent and whispered, "Schmidt, there is no shame in fearing death. How can an ambitious man with a thirst for power accept defeat so easily?" The worst option for Red Skull was to die together. "I believe the Allies will be very interested in Hydra's secrets." Luke chuckled lightly. The super soldiers were thick-skinned. Red Skull was punched in the abdomen, but he only fell on his knees and bent his back like a lobster. If it was an average person, his sternum should be broken, and he wouldn't get back up, ever. Cough cough, we are all products of the serum, with infinite possibilities, ah. Red Skull dropped his arrogant attitude and became humble, but Luke kicked him to the ground before he finished speaking. The fierce crimson head looked like cracked porcelain. "Your vision is too narrow, always trying to conquer the world, focusing on this blue planet, but ignoring the vast Milky Way. There's a lot of wonderful scenery." Luke's face was expressionless as he manipulated the device and took out the tesseract from the central hub. The wispy blue light, like flowing water, transformed into a solid wave of energy. Main quest: 6 Infinity Stones, the end of the singular universe. Requirements: collect the 6 Infinity Stones. 0/0. Completing this quest will open a new chapter in the multiverse. Reward: Superman card, the Devastator. After scanning the task, Luke was ready to reach for the metal instrument containing the tesseract. Red Skull, who had fallen to the ground and was having trouble getting up, stared at Luke with hatred in his eyes and uttered in a frantic voice, "No, it's mine. No one is going to take it away." He pulled out a flashing blue energy gun and pulled the trigger. However, the target wasn't Luke, but the tesseract. With a swoosh, the beam of light hit the metal instrument. Crack! The hard shell was broken. The cube, which emitted an eerie blue light, fell out. As if stimulated, the light glowed brightly. The entire cockpit is filled with energy fluctuations like fog. A little bit of blue light twisted and turned like tiny lightning. Sometimes they flicker, sometimes they intertwine, forming a highly luminous blue haze. The light is getting brighter and brighter, like it was going to rip open the void. See? This is the power of the gods. Compared to the great power it contains, humans are so small. There's a trace of obsession in Red Skull's passionate eyes. He gazed at the swirling vortex of energy inside the tesseract, a translucent cube that seemed to hide a whole Milky Way. The Norwegians kept it, concealing its existence within the statue of the World Tree, in an attempt to conceal it for a long time. However, fate led me to it. An endless source of energy, the key to world domination. Red Skull was spitting blood and shouting like he was crazy. "I have the core technology to extract the energy of the tesseract, General Cavill." "General Sir, I am the discoverer of this technology." Dr. Zola, who was hiding nearby, spoke up. He eagerly stood up and showed his value, completely ignoring Red Skull's angry eyes that almost seemed they could get spitfire. "Do you see that? Schmidt, you have no more value?" Luke smiled unconcernedly. He reached for the glowing cube, walked to Red Skull, raised his foot, and stepped on the crimson head. He originally wanted to keep the other side, both as a credit to the Allies and through the Strategic Science Reserve's torture methods, dig out more intelligence. Luke is very interested in Hydra's actual origins and the hidden history behind them. "It doesn't belong to you anymore, Schmidt." Luke raised his right hand and held the tesseract in his grip. It kept shaking but couldn't escape. The blue glow eroded through the veins, like a blaze burning the skin, and intense pain swept through the body. However, Luke didn't let go and clenched harder as if to crush the tesseract. It seemed to realize that it couldn't resist. The energy overflowing from the cube gradually gave birth to subtle changes. They seemed to form a unique pattern and resonate with a hidden rhythm. The void began to shake. It emitted a slight humming as if a doorway to an unknown world was about to form. Luke saw the vortex grow larger and larger, and as the energy released approached a critical point, the blue force field shrank slightly, and then a channel formed and slowly opened in the metal bulkhead of the cockpit. At the other end was a strange starry sky, with colorful and magnificent scenes. It was as unreal as it was real. That's God's domain. The dwelling of the gods. Red Skull shouted at the top of his lungs. With all his strength, he pushed the leg that stepped on his head. Like a thirsty traveler in the desert, when seeing an oasis, he rushed like crazy. Hydra's leader completely lost his mind and didn't care if what he saw was reality or a mirage. Luke didn't stop it. He gripped the buzzing and trembling tesseract with one hand while calmly watching Red Skull pounce on the gradually opening space channel. The other party was immediately wrapped in a mass of blue energy, like a poor guy trapped in bubbles, whose body was eroded and melted. No, it's not. Red Skull's expression changed from ecstasy to horror. Life's ups and downs were this fast. He watched his body being eroded by the blue energy little by little. Like weathering, it gradually disappeared into the cockpit. Have a nice trip. Luke smiled slightly as he listened to Red Skull's reluctant roar. If he guessed correctly, the other party should have been exiled to the planet Vormir, guarding the precious soul stone. May that barren world satisfy Red Skull's ambition. The universe is so big, and I want to see it. Luke, who held the cube, sighed. Looking at the other end of the space channel, the 9 starfields emerged. He couldn't restrain the impulse to plunge into it. The vast river of stars is home to not only human civilizations but other races as well. Not yet, wait. Luke held back the unexplainable restlessness, released his grip on the tesseract, and put the glowing cube into his suitcase. After leaving contact with organic life, the tesseract, one of the infinite gems, also calmed down and stopped releasing the strong energy fluctuations. Dr. Zola, can you fly a plane? Luke turned and looked at Hydra's chief scientist, who witnessed the whole process and asked gently. The latter nodded repeatedly as he was involved in designing this new aircraft. Simple operation is still possible. What about the whereabouts of John Schmidt, the Red Skull? Luke sat down beside the pilot's seat quickly and asked again. Schmidt is stubborn and bent on completing his evil plan of destroying half the world. General, you stopped him by yourself, shot this ambitious madman off the plane, and ended Red Skull's life. Dr. Zola replied in a very discreet manner. As a researcher of the Tesseract, he knows very well how powerful that single cube is. When ordinary people touched it directly, they would only be eroded by energy and turned into ash, but Luke was safe and sound. Through this, it was enough to prove that the other party accepted the second-generation serum injection from Dr. Erskine, became a perfect super soldier, which isn't something that ordinary people could fight against. Then let's go back, Dr. Zola. Luke leaned against the chair and closed his eyes gently. He noticed that the moment he held the tesseract, there seemed to be an invisible pair of eyes casting a gaze towards him. Who could it be? Brigadier Cavil said that Red Skull has been defeated, and the plane is heading back. In the control tower of Hydra headquarters, a non-uniform transmission came out of the radio. Carter patiently listened to the intermittent muffled words as her cold face showed a hint of a smile. Her tensed body also relaxed. It was a risky move to go after Red Skull and stop Hydra's Valkyrie project. At least, Luke should have waited for Rogers. We won. General Cavil saved half the world. Carter leaned over and told Colonel Phillips, who was waiting anxiously, for news of victory. A loud cheer erupted from the control tower as Captain Rogers and the Howling Commandos embraced in a hug. Defeating Hydra in one fell swoop and prevent half the world from turning into ruins. This meant an early end to the war and no more resistance from the Axis. Maybe we'll have to change the name from now on, Major General Luke Cavil. Colonel Phillips smiled with relief. Who would have thought that the Strategic Science Reserve could have unearthed 2 super soldiers in Camp Lehigh? Moreover, one of them would become a great hero who would change the world's course and end the Axis. The wonder of fate is hard to fathom. Major General, Hero, Superman. Carter whispered all the titles that belonged to Luke, but he couldn't help but feel stunned. What kind of person is he? 40 minutes later, the enormous new plane landed slowly and taxied on the empty tarmac. Congratulations, Brigadier General. This is another miraculous victory. Colonel Phillips took the lead and congratulated him. Hydra had always been a menace to the Allies. Their spies were pervasive and penetrated the top ranks. Agents carried out assassinations, which threatened the lives of crucial military personnel many times. The secret weapons possessed by Red Skull, the powerful energy weapons, almost cost the Allies the war. Now that the Axis powers have lost their only support, the Führer in Berlin had lost his last strong arm and had no more chances to recover. The good days of the Axis are over, Colonel Phillips said so. Luke nodded gently and smiled. Unfortunately, Red Skull wasn't captured alive. The desperate madman finally chose to jump off the plane. However, fortunately, there is Dr. Arnim Zola, who is deeply involved in various experimental projects in Hydra, and should be able to help the Strategic Science Reserve. Right, Dr. Zola? Zola, who was silent, nodded his head repeatedly and showed a repentant expression. The chief scientist of Hydra had repeatedly shown Luke that he is determined to turn over a new leaf. This positive attitude made the latter very satisfied. After all, talent is a scarce resource wherever you go. It's too wasteful to be put in prison or put to death. The better choice is to stay and be helpful. Luke, well done. Rogers rushed over with his shield and an excited expression on his face. He had long been looking forward to the end of the war, so he could find time to find Bucky's whereabouts. You also did a good job, Captain America. I heard you knocked down several teams of Hydra's soldiers. I guess I should probably call you Colonel Rogers soon? The honor of the Presidential Medal awaits you. Luke smiled back at the influx of familiar faces. Compared to everyone's excitement, he acted very calmly. Congratulations, General Cavill. Carter came along, too. She was standing in the rear but was pushed to the front by the Allied soldiers cheering for victory. What's the reward? Luke is carrying the case with the Tesseract, which is his trophy. When the war is over, we can go to the Army Club and dance. Feeling that aggressive look from Luke, Carter's cheeks flushed slightly. She remembered her crazy behavior after the dance that night. It's such a humiliating experience. The female agent thought so. That might be a good idea. Luke nodded and agreed. Berlin, the bunker of the Reich Chancellery. The Führer sat dumbfounded in his chair in the lounge, having received the war report of the Axis army's defeat 20 minutes earlier. However, this wasn't the worst news. 40 minutes ago, he learned that Hydra, led by Red Skull, was defeated by the Allied Superman in one fell swoop. Energy weapons that could have helped the Axis countries turn the tide were now lost forever. This means that the life of the Third Reich had come to an end. It shouldn't be like this. The Führer leaned back in his chair in a sullen manner and muttered. He once imagined that he would stand at the top of the world and say, "Ten Hut," to all humankind. The glory of the Third Reich will shine throughout Europe. In hindsight, it was a dream that couldn't be fulfilled. The Allies are about to enter Berlin. Eva. The Führer stood up and kissed his lover on the forehead. The warm and delicate body, lying on the sofa, has long lost her life. Upon receiving the news of the Hydra's defeat, the Führer knew that the situation was hopeless. So, he decided to take his beloved lover with him and run to hell together. Eva was afraid of pain, so she committed suicide by taking poison. Today, only the Führer himself remained. No one can judge me. He thought so. The Führer opened the drawer and took out a Walther P38 pistol. Then, he opened his mouth and held it against his upper jaw. In London, the Strategic Science Reserve received terrific news about the Soviet Union's disastrous defeat and heavy losses and the suspected emergence of super soldiers in Berlin. After successfully destroying Hydra's headquarters, Colonel Phillips took the Howling Commandos and took the initiative to stay, integrating the advanced technology and various resources left by Red Skull. Luke took Rogers, Carter, and others to return to London first. Red Skull was declared dead in people's eyes, Hydra fell apart, and the Valkyrie project to destroy half the world was stopped. This battle is like an early conclusion. Even Luke didn't think that the Axis powers could turn over. In a deluxe suite in the hotel. How could a terrifying monstrous entity lose so miserably? The enemy has Superman. Luke closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. According to the British military report, there are 3 humanoid creatures suspected of being super soldiers in Berlin. To be more precise, the super soldier in the British population should refer to an enhanced type like Luke, not a typical kind like Rogers. With an open rear in Berlin, these 3 men alone broke up hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. It was incredible. The First Belarusian Front, commanded by Soviet Marshal Zhukov, assaulted Berlin from the south and was met by some ordinary German soldiers. The opposed eyes could release destructive energy beams and directly blow up the tank fleet with their power, piercing the Soviet army and forcing countless people to surrender and become captives. The above was the contents of the telegrams sent by the Soviet Union. How did this happen? Rogers was dumbfounded when he saw the telegram. Are super soldiers so ordinary? How can the Axis powers start producing them? And there are 3 at once. I don't know, but the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, will meet with us this afternoon. So, we'll see what he says. 2 days ago, Germany. The finger holding the trigger trembled and couldn't pull down. Even the Third Reich ruler, the madman who provoked the World War, couldn't calm down in the face of death. Schmidt, that scum. The Führer lowered his pistol and scolded angrily. The dream of European domination was shattered. What else can he do? Did he have to rely on Sebastian Shaw's monsters? However, the Auschwitz concentration camp had long been breached by Allied forces. Sebastian Shaw, that disgraceful guy, took his mutants and slipped away without the slightest resistance. Traitor. Scum. The Führer cursed that bitch again. The thought of being surrounded by a bunch of douchebags made him bitter. Instead of being humiliated and tortured as a failure or meeting an executioner, killing himself was better. The Führer raised his pistol in anger and pointed it at his temple. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, the door burst open. Führer. The miracle weapon. The miracle has been built. The soldier in the German uniform and wearing a red swastika armband said. And the Allied troops were defeated. Just now, the Third Reich won a great victory. The sudden good news almost made the Führer's eyes pop out. The Walther pistol was aimed at his temple, but he dropped it in a hurry. Those dim eyes rekindled the flame of ambition. Repeated, did we defeat the Soviets? How did this happen? The Führer wrinkled his brow and asked. The Germans, who grew up in the snow and ice, approached Berlin's walls, which was a turnaround. We also have a Superman, the Aryan Superman, of the Third Reich. The soldier seemed to be in a frenzy. He excitedly said, someone has succeeded. General Sankt completed the project and created the perfect Aryan Superman. His name is Marcus Jung. Note. These 2 names weren't anywhere in the Marvel universe, but Uber Comics universe. He's like a tank. No, a bomber. No one can stop him, not even the Soviets. When the Führer heard this, he couldn't help but stand up and put his hands on the table. Despite his small stature, he exuded an aura of authority. Good. Let the general come and see me as soon as possible, and I want to know for myself if the Aryan Superman of the Third Reich matches the perfect image I have in mind. Confirming the news of the Soviet Union's defeat, the Führer swept away his depressed attitude and revived his strength. It's a pity, Eva. Glancing at his dead lover, the Führer came to grief and symbolically squeezed out a few tears. For the ambitious, power is a wine that can be enjoyed at the first sip, and beauty is just a cherry on top of the cake. Without the former, life is meaningless. If only the latter is possible, the same will apply. General Sankt is the hero of the Third Reich. The Führer was dancing around like a curly-haired baboon with a banana. The Aryan Superman project, also known as Fount of Life, was initially just an ethnographic experiment. The primary purpose is to create a superior race by allowing the so-called SS elite to have relationships with young blondes and blue-eyed women. Later, with the formal establishment of Hydra, this plan changed. The goal was to create super soldiers and help the Third Reich conquer the world. It was presided over by one of the confidants of the Führer, General Sankt. As the experiments continued to fail, the Führer has long lost faith in an Aryan Superman. He didn't expect the Third Reich to collapse, and at the last moment, the plan succeeded. The Allied Superman, the Führer ruthlessly looked at the newspaper on the desk, and the most conspicuous headline in the picture was a photo of Luke standing in a brigadier general's uniform. The Third Reich will rule the world. It's time for the Allies to tremble. Luke shrugged his shoulders. He didn't know who the 3 Supermen were. The young general saw a reward item in the item column by habitually scrolling through the stats. Green Lantern Corps Disc. The description was, a particular item developed by the Universe Guardians specifically for the Green Lantern Corps. After swallowing this disc, the user will temporarily possess the power of the Green Lantern. It's a disposable item, but it's better than nothing. Ignoring Roger's anxious look, Luke sorted out his recent gains. First of all, the reputation value is approaching 8 million points. In other words, it is enough to upgrade to LV2, soldiers, and still have a slight surplus. The second is his position in the Allied forces. Hydra's base siege, stopping the Valkyrie project, and other remarkable achievements through the city's capture. Had the war not ended, he might have returned to New York to receive his promotion to Major General. A young general at the age of 20 is unprecedented in the United States history and unprecedented in the future. Luke reached this point, mainly because it was a time of war, and senior officers were promoted very quickly. Moreover, the credit itself is indeed indisputable. In that case, the next plan will be, although history has now shifted and the Axis powers have been forcibly continued, Luke felt that the Third Reich's desire to dominate Europe and rule the world was a beautiful illusion that was entirely impossible to realize. As far as he knows, the US military's Manhattan Project has already been launched. In addition to those responsible for Groves and Oppenheimer, Luke's acquaintance Howard Stark has quit the Strategic Science Reserve and been drafted to the Oak Ridge Institute. It was not long before the world's first atomic bomb would explode in the desert of New Mexico. Then, a successful test explosion at Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. No matter the Axis's supermen, it was impossible to withstand nuclear weapons power. The other party is not a Superman in the real sense. Even the current Luke would find it hard to stand against a nuclear weapon. He still remembered the Superman in the movie, who was almost evaporated into a dry corpse by radiation. It is better to bask in the sun for a while, Luke thought so. The trajectory of history is complicated for individuals to change, and the top brass of the Allies are in a state of panic because no one could see the future. They are worried that if the Axis powers recovered, the war would last for an unknown period. This is the biggest problem. How much human resources and material resources does it take to support a world-scale war? How can the Allies be willing to be dragged into the quagmire again when victory is imminent? So, this is another chance to gain reputation. After so many TV and film productions in his previous life, Luke remained calm about the shocking news of the emergence of some supermen in the Axis countries. After all, what has he not seen? The Third Reich made zombie legions and beat the whole world. Führer discovers alien civilization, happily promotes advanced technology to win World War II. The United States was miserably divided by Germany and Japan and became a colony under the joint rule. Similar film and television works, nothing new. At this thought, the captain from the Axis powers, the Aryan Superman as usual. Luke let out a long sigh, quietly waiting to be summoned by Churchill. It should be interesting to think of the British Prime Minister slapping his desk and shouting, "Go get the Allied Superman." A black limousine drove through London's Trafalgar Square, past Whitehall Street, Westminster Abbey, King Charles Street, and finally stopped at an unnoticed street corner. There's a hole with sacks around like a bunker, going all the way down, a solid and thick underground fortress. I didn't expect His Excellency, the Prime Minister, to stay in such a place. Luke raised an eyebrow and seemed a little surprised. He thought that this meeting should be arranged in the Prime Minister's office or the Parliament Hall. A week before the outbreak of war, the Prime Minister opened these cabinet war rooms. Carter, who walked ahead, explained. Every day, the Prime Minister enters from an office building across the Foreign Ministry Street to direct military operations. This female agent is British, and she knows a lot about the intelligence services and the War Cabinet's various actions. Luke nodded his head and walked into the underground fortress called Cabinet War Rooms. The first thing that caught his eye was the map room, a crowded room with maps of various war zones all around its walls. There were more than 10 colorful telephones on the table. Carter explained that each color represents a different level. The ivory-colored phone on the right-hand side leads directly to Churchill's office. The Prime Minister's office is over here. Carter led Luke forward in a graceful manner, and the telephone bell kept ringing along the way, and the receiver kept working, just like a stock brokerage company on Wall Street. It seems that there is indeed a huge crisis at the front lines that's difficult to cope with. Luke thought to himself. After reporting their names and identities, they entered the conference room. When he opened the door, a pungent smell of tobacco came over him, almost suffocating him. Luke was able to withdraw his oversensitive senses in time to avoid being smothered to death. General Cavill, although I heard you were young, I'm still shocked at your age when I set eyes on you. Churchill put down the cigar in his hand and reached over, a smile appearing on his slightly sullen face. He is a smoker, loves to smoke cigars. It rarely leaves his hand. Prime Minister, I heard about what happened in Berlin. Luke shook hands with the big man, one of the big three of the Yalta conference, and then sat down to exchange pleasantries before getting straight to the point. We don't know the specific situation for the time being. The only information that can be confirmed so far is that the Soviet Union collapsed, nearly 100,000 people were taken as prisoners. The plan to conquer Berlin was temporarily blocked and put on hold. The Prime Minister exhaled a puff of smoke. Those narrowed eyes stared at Luke and asked in a deep voice, "Now, you're the only hope for the Allies, General Cavill. Is there anything I can do about it, Your Excellency?" Luke sat upright, making himself look more like a brave soldier obeying orders. He is interested in the Aryan Superman of the Axis powers. Both of their eyes can shoot energy beams, which is so powerful that it could explode tanks. The physical quality is beyond ordinary people, and ordinary thermal weapons couldn't hurt them. All these sound like a weakened version of Superman or an enhanced version of a super soldier. Is it true that Berlin had reverse-engineered Dr. Erskine's amazing masterpiece from the serum samples left by Red Skull? Luke expressed doubts about this. You know, later, the military had invested vast amounts of money and tried to restart the super soldier program, but it never succeeded. Generations change, and versions were diverse, but they all had side effects that were hard to ignore. There is only one super soldier like Captain America. Thus, it can be seen how difficult it was to study and replicate the serum. It didn't make sense that a technical breakthrough could be made so quickly on Berlin's side. Unless, of course, the Führer renewed everything, and opened an acceleration program, and ordered a new type of experiment. We planted an undercover agent in Berlin. The frowning Prime Minister took a strong puff of his cigar but didn't say anything for a long time. During World War II, the highly active intelligence organizations weren't only Hydra and the Strategic Science Reserve, but the MI6 from Britain too were very much involved. They had successfully assassinated the SS Chief of Security, one of the Führer of Berlin's right-hand men, and carefully groomed successor, Reinhard Heydrich. Her name is Stephanie. Shortly after the outbreak of war, she disguised herself as a Norwegian scientist and sneaked into Berlin's scientific research department, classified by MI6. The Prime Minister's expression was severe, and the thick cigar between his fingers flashed a faint spark. I heard from Stuart's mouth that Stephanie hadn't reported the situation for a year, and we have never contacted her actively for safety reasons. But just 3 days ago, the day before the defeat of the Soviet army, a message was received from Stephanie on the Special Access channel. She warned the Allies to be on the lookout for a monster being deployed from Berlin. As you can see, and as she said, those super soldiers appeared in Berlin and beat the Soviet army to death. Now, the only one who knows the specific situation and what happened is Stephanie. Luke listened carefully. He seemed to have guessed what the British Prime Minister wanted him to do. Rescue the undercover agent lurking in Berlin and get specific information about the Aryan Superman? Yes, General Cavill, I would like to ask you to bring Stephanie back. She's on her way to her homeland in England, but she's being pursued. Without Allied support, she'll have a hard time escaping. The Prime Minister, who is eloquent and a master speaker, said solemnly. Sincere tone and good attitude were prerequisites for impressing others quickly. I know that asking a brigadier general to rescue a London agent behind enemy lines is both embarrassing and dangerous. While observing Luke's expression, the Prime Minister thought carefully and said, but this is for the future of the Allies and to prevent the rise of the Axis powers. General Cavill, you have created miracles many times. This time, we believe you can do it. In the smoky office, the atmosphere suddenly became dignified. Along with senior staff sitting on the sofa in the corner, the British Prime Minister had their eyes focused on Luke. The dangerous parts of this rescue mission were, to prevent the Axis countries from discovering them, the number of people involved in the operation mustn't be too large, and it was best to sneak in alone. Luke, already an officer with a promising future, risks his life for the undercover agent of MI6. To be honest, when the Prime Minister made this request, he felt laughable himself. He had no right to give Luke orders, and the other party had no obligation to obey them. Miss Stephanie, who brought back the Aryan Superman intelligence and technology, is of great value to the Allies. Luke picked his eyebrows and said, I can take part in the rescue operation, but you guys must share the technology mastered by the Axis country's Berlin Scientific Research Department with the Strategic Science Reserve. After getting the answer, the Prime Minister nodded decisively without hesitation. The Soviets, who had held the Third Reich at bay, defended Nizhny Novgorod and Moscow, and bravely launched a counter-offensive, were defeated by the Aryan Superman of the Axis. How long can the British and American allies on the front lines hold on for? The Prime Minister knew very well that now wasn't the time to bargain and seek benefits. Even if he needed to pay a specific price to request Luke's help, it would be worth it. It's better than looking for those witches, or vampires, or werewolves. No problem. Allied forces are supposed to work together in good faith. The Prime Minister piled up a smile and spoke amiably. The people in the parliamentary hall were going to pop open champagne to celebrate when they heard that Hydra was falling apart, and the mountain-like Axis countries were defeated. Who would have thought that a Superman fell from the sky in Berlin and turned the tides of war? Now, the only thing that could stop the Führer's crazy ambition and save the Allies again was Luke. After all, only super soldiers could fight against super soldiers. Superman versus Superman. Then I will depart now, Your Excellency, Prime Minister. Luke stood up, tall like a mountain, standing in the office. By the way, please let the White House know so that the President could wait for good news.